When Sony first released the PlayStation 4 and Microsoft first released their Xbox One, I was scratching my head a little bit because I thought both these consoles back then were coming out with essentially outdated hardware. However, when we fast forward now to 2020, it's looking like it's a much different story for the upcoming PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. And so in today's video, we're going to go through these touted spec sheets on both these consoles and see what's going to make this generation of consoles a lot better than the previous generation. But also on that note, this is coming from a PC guy who has been playing PC games for most of his life. In other words, I've got a strong bias towards my desktop gaming PCs over consoles. So starting off with the Xbox Series X, this is the console that Microsoft have already essentially confirmed the spec sheet on what's going in this new console. And what they're putting in here is 8 cores, 16 threads of Zen 2 CPU cores. And that's right, you heard me right there. These are the latest CPU cores out available on the market from AMD. And not only that, this time around, AMD has better IPC than Intel, and that's instructions per cycle. And this is very important because the higher this is, essentially for the clock speeds that your CPU is at, the more it can do. In other words, the better it can do for gaming. And so the fact that it has these newer CPU cores going into it, plus the clock speeds that they're going to be clocked at, and this is another very important thing, where Microsoft's saying it's going to be 3.8 gigahertz without SMT enabled and 3.6 gigahertz with SMT enabled. And essentially that's just hyperthreading. So basically you're going to have 8 threads at 3.8 gigahertz and then 16 threads at 3.6 gigahertz. This is a massive step up from the previous generation consoles where they were clocked roughly around 1.8 to 2 gigahertz on 8 outdated cores at the time. And so we can see the massive improvement here. We're getting 8 core 16 threads of the latest and greatest that has clock speeds clocked similar to that of desktop PCs as opposed to the previous generations, which had CPUs that were coming out that were already outdated on old sluggish hardware. And so before we even jump into the graphics processors going into these consoles, you can see that these CPUs are so important in getting smooth FPS, but also getting higher FPS. And so this is a big reason why a lot of PlayStation 4 and also Xbox One users were making the switch to PC, because they could play games like Fortnite with higher FPS. When your CPU cores are only clocked at 1.8 gigahertz and they have an outdated design, you're going to get low FPS as a result of that. However, let's move over now to the PlayStation 5. That's rumored to have the same 8 core 16 threads of Zen 2 going into it, and this is going to be clocked at 3.5 gigahertz. However, in the case of the PlayStation 5, the specs are still not yet 100% confirmed. But for what it's worth, it looks like the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X will have very similar CPU processing power potential. However, that being said, that's only half the equation. Now we've got to move over to the GPU side of things, where this is where the two consoles will differ quite a bit, where the Series X is reported to have a graphics card in it that essentially hasn't even been released on the desktop gaming PC side of things yet. So what they've got is essentially an RDNA 2, and that's an AMD Navi 2 solution that will be going into these consoles that will essentially have graphical processing power better than that of a current generation 5700 XT, for example, which is AMD's best desktop gaming graphics card out on the market at the moment. And the fact that it's got more compute units of 52 versus 40 of that graphics card, not only are you going to see better performance due to that extra hardware inside, but you're also going to have a generational improvement of efficiency and also more processing power. And as for the clock speeds on this unseen GPU, they're touting it as having 1825 MHz flat, which is coming in very similar to that of the current generation RX 5700, for example. The move over to the PlayStation 5 side of things, they're going with a RDNA 2 solution as well, so that's the same generation of graphics from AMD. But their unit is supposedly only going to have 36 compute units. So essentially the graphics processing power is going to be a lot more on the Xbox Series X than it theoretically could be on the PlayStation 5. Keep in mind that Sony haven't officially announced the specs just yet, but these are the strong rumors coming through the industry that it's not going to be as powerful as the Series X solution. However, on that note, it is rumored to be clocked at 2200 megahertz, so it will still go very hard. And if we were to compare this to a current generation AMD graphics card, it looks like the specs are lining up with an RX 5700, but because you got higher clock speeds and also a generational improvement, it's going to essentially perform better than an RX 5700 XT. So there's pretty much the specs on the CPU and GPU side. Now, what Sony and Microsoft are both doing is integrating their hybrid GDDR6 memory solution, and that they're using dedicated graphics card memory, and they're using that for the CPU side of things as well. They already did this on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, so it's nothing new to the industry, and it's essentially a cost-cutting measure that allows them not to use standard DDR4 system memory. And on top of that, both console makers are to be putting in quite large SSDs in these new consoles. So essentially, what does this mean for you now as a console gamer, or even if you're a PC gamer and you're thinking about even getting a console and maybe playing games via mouse and keyboard? Well, to be frank, and it does hurt me a little bit to say this, the new consoles are going to be similar to high-end gaming PCs. They've got relevant and latest and greatest CPU cores that are clocked quite high. They've got GPUs going into them that essentially haven't even been released on the desktop market yet. So not only are you going to get a really good visual experience, but you're also going to be able to play competitive multiplayer titles with high FPS, which was something that the PS4 and Xbox One could never do due to them having really weak CPU cores. Another thing about the older consoles was when they were first released, not only were the CPU cores outdated, but the GPU that they were using was estimated to be somewhere in the processing power of a 7790 or a 7870. And so at the time here on the channel, we built a few console killer builds, and they were coming in with really good price performance. And it does pain me to say this, but this time around, it's going to be very difficult for me to do a price performance build, even if it's used, to beat the performance of these new consoles. And I'm going to have to get really just ridiculous one-time deals in order to beat the price performance of this thing. But that being said, the prices of these new consoles, Sony is rumored to be going around the $500 mark, and the Series X, the price is still undetermined, but if I had to make a guesstimate, I'd say it'd be anywhere from $600 to $700. When we look at the sheer hardware going into both these new consoles, that stuff isn't cheap to manufacture, so you can definitely expect a higher price tag than that of the original PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Lastly, in terms of the release dates, you can expect these consoles to come out between October and December of this year. Apparently they were meant to come out earlier, but due to the circumstances all around the world right now, we really can't blame them if they're getting it out a bit later. However, I'm sure both these manufacturers will not want to miss the Christmas sales period. Though lastly, in terms of the designs of both these consoles, I would like to see them in the flesh before I pass any judgment. I mean, from what we're seeing so far, we got some new funky designs. I really don't care a whole lot, again, until I see that in person, because another thing as well that I'm really concerned about is the cooling on these new consoles, where if I had to guesstimate power consumption figures, it'd be anywhere from 300 to 350 watts on the Series X, and then on the PlayStation 5 maybe 250 to 300 watts. So they are going to consume a bit more power than the original PlayStation 4 and also Xbox One ever did. And so when you're consuming more power from a hardware standpoint, you need better cooling. So maybe these consoles will in fact be a bigger unit than what you're used to. And if they're using a smaller design, that means smaller fans. And what that means is you're going to have a very loud console while you're gaming. And with all that out of the way, if you guys enjoyed today's video, then be sure to hit that like button. Also, let us know in the comment section below, are you a PC gamer? Are you a console gamer? And if so, what do you think about these upcoming consoles? As I said earlier in this video, I think they're definitely going to be something to look out for. Even if you're a PC gamer, you've got to admire what Microsoft and Sony are both doing this time around in getting the hardware right. Though that being said, do drop a comment, as I love reading your thoughts and opinions, just like this question of the day right here, which comes from Custom PC Builder, and they ask, I heard old low resolution monitors are in demand now because you can get higher FPS in games with them. And this is mainly a PC gaming question, where it comes back down to essentially lowering your resolution, and that enables you to get higher FPS. And that's because, especially if your graphics card isn't fit for the job, Lowering the resolution will essentially make it less strenuous on the graphics card, so essentially you can get higher FPS. It does work wonders, especially if you're playing games like Fortnite. But that being said, that is one good thing about PC, is that you can customize all the settings, you can customize your hardware, but that is a trade-off versus the consoles, where they do get what's known as console optimization, where you'll get yet even more performance. So what's coming out of these new consoles, I am definitely looking forward to seeing it. And with that aside, if you guys enjoyed the content and you stayed this far and you want to see more of this tech-related content, then be sure to hit that sub button, ring that bell, and I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye. And also, as for a PlayStation 5 console killer PC build, I'm definitely going to be trying, don't worry.